Okay, so yes, you can see I'm just going to talk about my story today, but I'm actually from Macomb Community College, which is about half an hour to the east of here, and I teach math there, and I'm in my fifth year there, so almost done with my fifth year, and teaching math is tough. I will say, teaching math is particularly difficult because most of them don't want to be there. And they make it very clear. I mean, this is election year, and one student told me that she hates math more than she hates Donald Trump. So, so what can I say? If that's the attitude I have to deal with, that's what it is. But before I start here, though, I will give you a little background about where this presentation came from. And one of my interests happens to be local history and Michigan history. And so I was at the Michigan History Conference about 2 months ago or so, and there was this Asian American woman there who was telling her story, and then I sort of was inspired to tell a little bit more about my story, especially because of the fact that she was stressing that Asian Americans from the Midwest have a totally different story than somebody who would live out in California or on the West Coast. And so a lot of Asian Americans from that part of the country traditionally have come over in large groups and so forth and so on. And here in this part of the country, it's a little bit different. So I remember growing up that I only knew, 2 other Asian Americans, and one of them was the daughter of the French teacher at school, and the other one happened to be the lady who was I ended up being the valedictorian of my high school, and she was the salutatorian, and so she was actually very angry at me for that. But, it just so happened that we ended up being the number 1 and number 2 the year I graduated from high school. So I really didn't know a lot of other Asians in the area, and my parents tried to take me to support groups, or I don't know if I want to say them support groups, but culture groups. And some of the questions I've always had about my background are, what cultures and traditions do I want to preserve myself, because there might be some other cultures and traditions that I want to try to preserve. And the fact that I've lost the Korean language sometimes bothers me, but I do know that there are some people in my life who would be willing to teach me again if I wanted to. But the truth of the matter is that as somebody who's been here most of my life, I've been colonized. To put it no other way, I've been colonized, and this is the way that it is, and I've been in the Midwest most of my life, and in every attempt I've tried to get out of the Midwest has been unsuccessful. So I applied for jobs after grad school, and they fell through for whatever reason at all. I mean, there would have been lots of other places in the country or around the world that I would have maybe ended up, but here I am still, and so I'm going to tell you sort of today how I got to this exact point of standing here today. So if you do have any questions or want me to go a little bit more in depth, that's fine as well. But I'm also going to sort of weave in the theme of specifically how I came to become a math teacher and how I chose my path, and how that sort of plays a role and has an impact on how I I interact with my students, because sometimes, you know, when they see my name in the course catalog and walk into the room, I'm not what they're expecting, and so I think that plays to the stereotypes that we have in this country, and it's just something where I have to explain to them a lot of times that stereotypes exist, and sometimes you can use them in a positive way, sometimes not in a positive way, but just because somebody has a certain appearance about them doesn't mean that they're not an okay person, and they're not necessarily an okay person to work with. And I tell them that from day one, that, you know, look around you, these are the people that you are going to be working with for the next 15, 16 weeks. So I just actually read an article that in the Faculty Focus that said that on the last day of class you should take selfies with your students, because it said that will serve as the reminder for everyone that this will be the last time that all of you will be in the same room studying the same topic at the same time ever again. And I think that was a powerful statement to me, that, you know, this is the only time that all of you are going to be in this exact room all at the same time with the same exact people, like, thinking about these sort of issues. So a little bit about how I got here. I was adopted from Seoul, South Korea, and if you know a little bit about the Korean culture, what happened to me is that my birth mother abandoned me because she couldn't afford to take care of me, and so she dropped me at the orphanage. And the thing is that my birth father had actually walked out on her, and so she couldn't afford to take care of me on her own. And because of the shame of all of that in the Korean culture, she didn't even want the orphanage to know her name. So I don't even have her name, I don't have her picture, I couldn't even find her today if I wanted to. And, you know, that's sort of one of the number one questions that people ask me. Do you want to go back and look for your birth mother someday? Theoretically, I probably might be able to find her if I go back to that orphanage and go back to the hospitals and check all of the records, but I'm guessing that's a $50,000-$60,000 thing to try to do. For somebody who abandoned me, I sort of, you know, I don't know if I want to spend $50,000 or $60,000 to go find her. So I go back and forth on that some days. Do I want to even think about this anymore? And a lot of the days I just, you know, I have so much other stuff going on that it floats to the back of my mind. Maybe when I'm 80 or 90 and I decide that that's something that I need to do, then I'll do it, and then I'll find out that she's no longer alive, since I don't even know how old she is anyway. So that's how I ended up getting here. Now, for those of you who aren't from the area, I lived in Genesee, Michigan till I was about 4 or 5. So here we are here at Schoolcraft College, and you can see to get to Genesee, Michigan, it's about an hour and 15 minutes away. So that gives you an idea of sort of where I grew up. And today, most anything from Detroit up to Flint is pretty much considered a northern suburb of Detroit. And so it's really odd how that even works around here as well. But, you know, at the time, though, since I was the only Asian person in the neighborhood, and we lived in this Indian Hills trailer park here, there were even Indian boys in the neighborhood who were bullying me, and I didn't realize it because I was too young to even realize I was being bullied yet, because I just thought that it was just the young boys playing, and that's just the way kids were supposed to behave, and I didn't know that that wasn't really acceptable. And so my parents finally decided that they had had enough of me being bullied by the Indian kids and by the other children in the school, and they decided to move to Flint. Now, before I go on to my journey in Flint, I will say that this is about the time that I also realized I was colorblind. And I didn't know that I was colorblind, but they were telling me in kindergarten, color these drawings, and I didn't know what was going on. And so I would lean over to the girl next to me and have her color all of them. And it turns out I was in a kindergarten first grade classroom, so the teacher, you can imagine, had a lot to do. So she would force us to color while the first graders were doing their math lessons. So I would sit and listen to all of the math lessons while she was doing the coloring. And that was my first exposure to math. And then they realized I was cheating on the coloring assignments. And I said, well, I don't really think I'm cheating on them, I just can't do them. And so they actually ended up having me test it, and so I got the only crayons in the entire classroom that had the names on the label, so that I would know what each crayon was. But then that really didn't help me, because then they said, color the tree this color, and I said, well, so I'm supposed to memorize that a tree is this color and that the water is this color, and so I'm memorizing what color everything is, and I have these crayons, and it just really wasn't a good situation. It sort of has followed me into today even. And even today when I'm teaching my math classes, I'll circle certain words and certain colors, but I have all my highlighters labeled with what color they are, and I have to remember what color goes to what, and and sometimes if I mess up, I just highlight the whole page and I just let them deal with it. So, there were a lot of issues going on, and I also had to end up taking speech classes until I was about in 7th grade. And even though I came to Michigan at a fairly young age, I still think that being from the orphanage, I didn't have some of the guidance in getting the pronunciation of some of the words down, and so I did have to have some speech remediation. And so even today, sometimes I find that if I'm not careful, everything sort of runs together. But it's the same thing as if I'm writing in print and all of a sudden it changed to cursive and then back, and it's just a habit that I have to try to pay attention to.
Quick question: did you know any English before you came here?
No. So my parents pretty much didn't know any Korean either. So it was just still one of those things where I think it was just it took me a little bit of time to transition, and I still had some leftover speech issues until the 7th grade. So and actually, not even that, but there were some other issues because of the fact that I was actually the only child they adopted. And back in the 80s when they adopted me, the adoptions were about $10,000 to $12,000 per child. And so that was a lot of money in the 80s, so they could only afford one child. And so I was a very shy kid at home, and it rolled over into the public. And so even when I was in the 12th grade of high school, one of my teachers told me, "You will never make it as any sort of teacher or public speaker. You should just get a desk job and live the rest of your life." So, you never know what sort of things you actually remember, because the fact that I still remember her saying that today means a lot. So there's a lot of characters I've encountered over the years. Okay, so there was Genesee, Michigan, and then you can see that when I was around 5, we moved all the way over to Flint, which is only 20 minutes or so away, but a lot changes in 20 minutes. And Genesee is all rural, and you can see all the parks and things, and this is a complete city. So we moved to the city because my mom thought that I would have better opportunities, and she was tired of the Indian kids harassing me. But, if you know anything about Flint, it's very inner city, so there are pretty much two populations. You have the black and you have the white, and everyone knew who they were, and so I pretty much assumed I was white at that point, and I tried to stay quiet about it. And I felt like I was a little bit suppressed most of my life, and so it's just one of those things where I eventually, around the first grade, after I had that experience watching math for a year, I got introduced to a movie called Stand and Deliver. Now, who has heard of that movie? Yeah, it's one of those movies about inner city, I think Los Angeles, and this high school teacher who was very successful in teaching the high schoolers AP calculus, and they go on and have tremendous success. And so on top of that, I just started becoming even more interested in mathematics. So it just fueled my journey. And what didn't help, let's put it this way, is that when going from Genesee to Flint was a big transition for me to be in an inner city school versus being in a rural school. And it wasn't just the population, but it was the fact that the learning environment was just tremendously difficult for me. And they told my parents one day that if I didn't start passing my spelling test, that they would actually have to hold me back. And they said this was the only subject that your son is failing, and he has to learn how to spell in English. So, that's when it all started. I was sat down, and they sat me down in the donut shop across the street from the school for an hour before every Friday spelling test, and gave me a donut hole for every word I spelled correctly. And it still shows today. But this is the way that I learned spelling. If you spell a word correctly, you get a donut hole. And so eventually I became a fairly decent speller, but just the fact that I was having trouble, even though I hadn't had a lot of Korean formal instruction, little to none, some of the characters are still in my mind, and so I was having trouble getting the English words down on paper. So then I remember being in the second grade, and the same sort of thing, like we lived in a quieter neighborhood, so a lot of the neighbor kids didn't really bother me, but it was the kids at the school who were bullying me, and they kicked me in the crotch several times, and I didn't realize that was wrong. I just thought, like I mentioned before, that was just one thing that kids did to each other in America. So I I didn't think anything of it, and then eventually when I came home with bruises on areas where they shouldn't have been, my parents started asking questions. So, I mean, there's a lot of things I had to take in account myself going from the transition of a rural school to a more urban environment. So, this is actually a picture of the house that I grew up in. So I thought I would add that just so that you can sort of see that really isn't a rural environment at all. I mean, it's far from the trailer park that I grew up in for a couple of years until we moved here, and it actually still looks like that today. So that was actually 2015. It's amazing what Google can show you. So, and I'm actually impressed that they grayed out my neighbor's license plate number there. But let me show you sort of exactly what is going on here. So I guess I can't show you this laser pointer isn't working here, but right about the 4th Street up from where I'm pointing right now is where the house is. And that big open field on the left is where the elementary school is that I went to, but it got torn down because of Flint had budget cuts and then people were setting fires in the basement. So that's where I went to elementary school, and then right here is where I went to middle school and high school. So everything was pretty contained. I mean, I could actually walk to school if I wanted to. Now, with that being said, I never did walk to school. Well, I had to a few days, but I typically didn't walk to school because right here, right going across this road here, it is one of those big metal catwalks, and there were drug dealers right around there, and they would always harass me every morning that I would go for the walk over to school. And I told my parents about them, and they said, well, there's no way there could be drug dealers harassing you at 8:30 a.m. in the morning. And I said, but there are, and you need to come see. No one believed me, and I said it for years and years and years, and so every morning I would walk to school. I would have to come all the way down to this corner and then all the way back over, which ended up being, quite a long walk. So I didn't like being harassed by the drug dealers, and so I had to do that extra walking there. So let's see, what else was I going to say? Now, in high school, I had a few problems as well, and one of them is that I had a couple of issues with the police, and it's very unfortunate, but one of them was when they had a check day for cell phones, because cell phones in the 90s were no-nos at school. You just weren't allowed to have a cell phone in school, and so people did it anyway, and the police were all male, like your stereotypical macho man police officer, and they would let all of the women through, or all of the female students through the metal detector with their cell phone on them because they didn't feel comfortable patting them down. And they didn't have a female officer there to do that. And then I got there and I didn't realize what was going on, and so I more than happily would have taken my cell phone back to my car, but they didn't give me the opportunity to do that. They just took it away, and they said, don't ever bring that cell phone in here again, you big fat Asian pumpkin. And I said, well, that's just not really the way you talk to the students that you're working with in the high school. And so I did end up reporting that to the principal when I went to claim my cell phone later in the day, but the only thing that they were able to do is remove that officer from the school, and I haven't seen him ever since. So I guess he went to a different school. But it just things like that really make you wonder. Like even if the staff at the high school or the police officers at the high school are feeling this way, it could boil down to some of the students treating other students this way as well because they think it's the right thing to do. And then, I mean, there were several other times when the staff was less than friendly with me as well. And there were some of the things that I think were stereotypical things that happened to me. Like I was asked to be on the quiz bowl team because they thought, well, here's the Asian guy who's good at math. We need somebody to be on the quiz bowl team to try to get our quiz bowl scores higher. And little did they know that I was only going for the snacks and I didn't answer any of the questions. So I just sat there and I made it on TV one year. So I mean that was for somebody in high school an accomplishment. Alright, so my high school was actually very rough for me. I mean, the staff didn't really like me, some of the other students didn't like me, and so, believe it or not, my high school was supposed to be the Northern High School over there. I didn't say this before, but Southwestern Academy, right over here, this is where the house is, and this is Southwestern Academy. Southwestern Academy was supposed to be the elite school in the city of Flint. And so it was a school where you had to apply to get in, and my parents thought, well, that would mean that it would probably be a better school for you, and all of that, and it's close to where they were living, but as I mentioned, it wasn't that much better at all. So my last 2 years of high school were completely different, and I think that they were two of my favorite years in high school. And remember I said that I went there for middle school and high school, so I actually went there 7th through 12th grade to the Southwestern Academy. But starting in the 11th grade, this is sort of how my high school day went, and it's because of the fact that in order to have graduated from Southwestern Academy, I had to attend at least one class there. And so I started at 6 a.m. or so to take my one class at Southwestern Academy, so I could say I graduated from there. And then they said, okay, now you have to drive over to Northern High School. And because of this, I was actually the first person in my high school class to get a car. And so I remember this car very well because it was a $200 car that my dad bought me because he knew I needed a car for school. And he worked at GM all of his life, and he knew this mechanic who fixed it up. He didn't fix it up. The car always overheated, it always broke down, but it was $200 and I was a high schooler and I appreciated having a car. Which, I mean, I see some high schoolers today who drive brand new cars, so it makes me wonder, even in the last few years, what has changed in the world even. But Northern High School was on the north end of town, of course, and that's the high school I would have went to if my parents wouldn't have applied for me to go to the special Southwestern Academy. And the culture at Northern High School was different. It was more diverse. There was a cultural shift. The staff was friendlier, and I enjoyed it. I took my math and science classes there, and then I had to go all the way over to the Genesee Area Career Institute or Genesee Area Skill Center, and I took the entrepreneurship and international business classes, and because I wanted to learn about business and business in the international setting, and that's where a lot of my exposure to real life applications of all the things I was doing in the world history class and things like that came in. Like I said, well, I kind of know why people in France might react this way because of what I learned in my world history class. So I was learning a lot about applications of culture through my international business classes. And then, so I was over here from like 6 to 7 a.m. at Northern High School from like 9 to 11, here from like 12 to 2. Oh, yes.
May I ask, first of all, did you say class started at 6 a.m.?
Yes.
What class was that?
It was, there. One year it was a world history and the other year was a Russian class.
Wow. I just want to ask, how did the racial demographics compare to the three schools, Southwestern, Northern, and Genesee?
Well, the Southwestern was honestly, it was people who would have been normally bused to the suburbs that existed back then, but it didn't. And Northern High School was primarily black neighborhoods around there, and Genesee Area Skill Center, that was actually people bused from all over the county. So it was everybody. So from rural to very urban people. And so I actually think that helped me also. And I have a funny story about that. In the entrepreneurship class, we got to run the school store, and each group of people got to run the school store for 1 week. And I ran it for 1 week as the manager, and somehow we were the only group to bring in over $2,000 in a week in sales. And so they invited us back for 2 more weeks at the end of the semester, and then all the students got to keep the money that they made at the end of the semester. So I got a big $2,000 check for being in school. I thought that was pretty great. But that's also because as the manager, a couple of the other people missed class a day, and I took like 50% of their share away if they missed 1 day, and another 25% if they missed 2 days of school, and they got nothing if they missed more than 2 days of school. So that's why I got over 2,000 and they got like 200. But I said, I'm the manager, I can make the rules. So, but you know, it is a very different culture when you have people being bused from all over the county. It was a different experience for me to have. But the oddest part, though, is after my noon to 2 here, I had a 2 to 4 p.m. class at the University of Michigan Flint. And so they had me taking night classes there while I was still in high school because the year before, and this is the ironic thing about the fact that I was a very slow learner in English, it's that by the time I got to the 11th grade, there was no more English for me to take at the high school. That's the ironic part about my slow start to learning English, is that in the 10th grade I had to even take an independent study because they didn't have a British literature class at the high school yet, so I said, read this British literature, write 9 book reports, and that will be your independent study, because they didn't know what else to do. And so then in the 11th and 12th grade, they said, take Composition 1 and Composition 2, because we have to have you do something to get English credits to graduate from high school. And I will say that right now that the English classes there were not the same as what I had in high school. Like, high school English doesn't prepare students for college English at all. So that was a big shock for me. Like, I thought, well, I had 10 years of really trying to learn English very well, and then you're going to tell me that everything that I tried to learn is wrong. And that was just, that was heart-crushing almost. That I put all of that hard work into learning English, and then I was told, you're just wrong. This is the way you write, this is the way you do it, this is just the way it's going to be. So, that was interesting. And then I also took, Northern High School was where they offered the calculus classes, and that's why they had shipped me from here over there. But by the 10th grade, I had calculus, so they said, okay, now you take the English on Monday, Wednesdays, and on Tuesday, Thursday, you take your calculus class over there. And so I had calculus 1, and I had calculus 2, and I had some honors math seminar that was very interesting. He proved Kepler's law by using only calculus 1 material. So I thought that was interesting, because a lot of times you need more advanced mathematics than that to see that sort of proof. So that was an interesting exposure to that as well. So, with that being said, though, I think that the only thing that got me through high school was the fact that I wasn't staying in one place at one time for the last 2 years. But I really just wanted to get out of the city. It wasn't for me. So I tell this to my students a lot also, and it's that I applied to one college and I got accepted to one college, and I tell them you probably shouldn't do the same thing when you're applying to transfer from Macomb to another college. At least apply for more than one college. Don't do the same thing that I did, because I'm lucky that I got in. If I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have even went to college. But I had big plans back then. I thought, well, if I don't get into college, I'll go on the Amazing Race, and maybe they'll have a stop in Korea, and then I'll find my mom or something while I'm on the Amazing Race, and so I was just a high schooler, and I didn't know any better, so I just thought, okay, well, I have a backup plan. So I was going to actually talk about one other thing before I get to my college trip. Well, this is actually very interesting, because this also fueled part of my decision to want to go as far away from home for college as I possibly could. So you can see that there's the house I grew up in again, and this is where my parents went to church, and they were very devout Baptist. And I don't, there's all different types of Baptist, and Southern Baptist, American Baptist, and this particular group of Baptists was very strict. I mean, strict to the point that you couldn't even, my parents had their wedding reception at the church, and they couldn't even have dancing, because they didn't believe in dancing, they didn't believe in playing cards. I mean, my parents did all these things at home, but the church, but I mean, they religiously attended church every week, and this was the church. I mean, you can see that it's very rural, right down a 2-lane road there, and it was all white kids at the church, and so a lot of times I would be bullied at church even. And some of my cousins went to the church, and they would bully me as well. And so I would report this bullying, and nothing was done about it. So I sort of, again, grew up thinking that this was okay, because if the church kids are doing it and it's happening at school, this is just the way that the world works. So I just started being quiet about all of it. But then going to college gave me a chance to get away from all of this. So I went a little bit over 2 hours away to Ferris State University. Somebody was asking about Allendale yesterday. I mean, that's right over here. So that's actually that whole part of the state to the west of 131 is one of my favorite parts of the state. Anywhere along the west coast of Michigan is absolutely beautiful. If you're not from around here, it's worth coming back. So what I will say is that Ferris State gave me an opportunity to really just meet some new people. Alright, so I got a different sense of belonging that I never got growing up, because I was bullied by the kids in the neighborhood, bullied at school, bullied at church, and they bullied by the staff. And so I just thought to myself, this is my new start. And of course, being at a big university, you're going to get a more diverse population, and this is the funniest part of all of it. The reason why I ended up applying to go to Ferris State is because it's the only school I attended where, and I didn't even want to get off the bus on the campus tour. They drove the bus up to the campus, and I said, this looks like too big of a campus, and I wasn't going to get off the bus. And so one of the ladies said to me, here, come here. And she walked me over to the dorm rooms and said, if you apply for the honors program, I'll give you $2,000 off of this private room with carpet and a ceiling fan. And I said, oh, okay. And then I applied to go there. That's all it took was a carpet and a ceiling fan to get me to apply to go to Ferris State. Which, it could have all ended up differently, but I didn't know what I wanted to do in college, so I was going to be a high school math teacher. That didn't work out. I was going to be, and actually it got all the way to the point where I student taught in a very rural school. Even, do you see White Cloud over there on the left? It was in White Cloud, and very, very rural school, and they didn't even put me in a math classroom. They put me in a 7th grade English in gym class. So I was, in a gym class. So I was their gym teacher for a semester, and I taught them English for a semester. And I thought, well, I'm supposed to be learning how to teach math, but I'm teaching you English and gym. And imagine me chasing the kids around, and I'm like, okay, so just play with the basketball. I don't know what else to do with you guys. So they did that to me, so I changed my major, and I changed it to business because I had that background in business from high school. And then I thought, all of these business people are suit-wearing jerks. I don't want to be in the business culture the rest of my life. So then I tried computer science, because that is a lot of mathematics as well. And I realized, well, I really don't want to sit here just looking at this code all day and trying to figure out why the computer doesn't work. So I said, well, instead of looking at the screen, why don't we do hardware repair? But back at the time that I was in college, most of the computers had colored wires in them. Now, think about that. I almost fried the motherboard on one of the computers because I connected the yellow one where the green one should have been. So I said, okay, computer hardware repair is not for me. I ended up passing the class, but the instructor was very angry I almost fried the motherboard. So Then I switched to psychology. And I said, okay, the psychology thing sounds really good. But then I realized, no, I can't read all of these papers on psychology for the rest of my life. So I switched from that. And then I switched to English for a semester. And then I realized, wait a second. This means I'm going to be reading even more books than if I would have been a psychology major. So I switched again. And what happened is that despite all of these switches and majors, because I had those credits from high school, I still finished in 3 years. And so, what the third end of the 2.5 years, I went into my advisor and I said, I'm not happy. I don't know what I want to do. And he said, if you change your major to math, you can graduate in 3 months from now in May. And I said, oh, okay. And so I changed it to math, not just because I wanted to get out of there. And so I had a degree, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like that was sort of a cop-out because I knew there was a stereotype of Asians are good at math, and then it didn't even dawn on me why that stereotype even came to be about until a couple of weeks ago. And some of you probably know this history, but back in the 1900s, like middle of the 20th century, the United States put a quota on the number of Asians that could come into the United States. And so the Asian countries would send their best people over. And so the best people that they sent over ended up being the best at math. And so that's how we got the stereotype, at least in the United States, that Asians are good at math. And it never really occurred to me that that was the case. That, I mean, I ended up being decent at math, but I didn't go through the Korean educational system. So this tells me, I tell my students, I went through the educational system in inner city Flint, and you're telling me that you are not good at math. No, that's not an excuse. If I got something out of inner city Flint education, you can do something. So do something with your life, please. So I really try to drive that point home that, don't think of me as somebody who went through the Korean educational system, because I did not. I went through all of this work in high school and ended up going to Ferris State, and it kind of gave me a different perspective on my student struggles with math. But with that being said, I didn't know what I wanted to do after undergrad, and so I had two plans. One of them was to go on Survivor, and the other one was apply to one school and get accepted into one school. So I applied to Oakland University, and I got accepted into Oakland University. So I still had absolutely no plan. I just knew I had the math degree, and the only reason why I ended up going to Oakland University is because they were the only college or university in the area that offered a teaching assistantship for master's students. And I didn't want to commit to be a PhD student yet because I still didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went there and I thought, okay, I'll teach for a couple of semesters while I'm getting my master's and be done. Well, I ended up living in those Auburn Village townhomes. And this is where Oakland University is, right here. Now, Auburn Village townhomes is right on the border of Pontiac and Auburn Hills. And if you don't know anything about Pontiac, that's a very primarily black neighborhood or city, just like Flint was. So I was going back to a city and a culture sort of like what I grew up in, inner city. And, well, I got robbed twice in 1 year at Auburn Village townhomes. And I thought, this is very violating. And I know what it was, is that they were targeting me and I heard this later on from a neighbor. There was a gang of kids in the neighborhood who were targeting me because I was Asian, and they were monitoring when I would be home and gone, and so they knew when I was gone, and they robbed me twice. So I said, that's just completely violating, and so I ended up moving down the road to Rochester, Michigan, which is, even though it's only 20 minutes away, Rochester, Michigan is one of those, it's a very white neighborhood because it's rural and people are rich there. And so they have a lot of money there. And so I had some very negative experiences living in Rochester. Like, as a TA at Oakland University, I didn't really have any summer work. And so 1 year I applied at Hallmark, and the Hallmark was like halfway between the university and Rochester. And I put my application on the counter and I gave it to the manager there, and she said, "Oh, just put it on the counter." And then I was walking out of the store, and then I heard the manager say very loudly to her employee, "Can you please throw that application on the counter away? I'm not even going to touch an application by an Asian man." She wouldn't even touch the paper because I had touched it. And I thought, that is telling to me that this is still existing today, that people, she wouldn't even touch my application. And I just want to work there as a summer job so I would make money so I could go to grad school. It wasn't like I was somebody, in my mind at least, who just didn't even want to be there. And so, and we were talking about yesterday in one of the sessions about refugees and how most of them are really self-sufficient within 6 months of coming to the United States. And so if somebody is trying to make money and be self-sufficient and they have that sort of attitude, they're never going to end up being self-sufficient because there's no way for them to get employment if people are going to treat them that way. So I really internalize how people might feel in all of their struggles from having that happen to me. Alright, so then I told you about my struggles with the church early on in life earlier. And there is Oakland University in Rochester where I live. And about 15 minutes away were these two churches. And I thought, I gave up going to church when I was at Ferris State. And I went to Oakland University. I thought, something isn't really there. Maybe I'll find it in church. And the worst part is I didn't find it in church. This church right here actually told me that I told them I did not want to volunteer in the preschool, and they had me volunteer in the preschool, and and the worst part is I actually, the kids love me for the most part, but one morning I had a kid who would not stop crying, and there are weeks when that just happens. They just want their mother for whatever reason. And so I pick him up and I take him over to his mother, and his mother said, "The only reason he's crying is because you're a big, fat, scary Asian man." And this was inside the church. And I thought, if that's how it's happening in the church, I don't know what to say. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll report back to the church, and they must understand, they're a church. And the pastor said to me, "Oh, that happens in the church all the time. Just forgive the person and move on." And so I thought, okay, that's not the right solution to that. So I went to the other church a little bit farther away, and then I thought I'll give church a third shot. And well, what happened there is after a few months I wanted to get involved, and so I said, "Oh, well, I'll be a greeter at the front door. There can't be anything that would go wrong with shaking somebody's hand and handing them a piece of paper when they walk in. And somebody at the church said to me, you can't be a greeter because we don't want an Asian person to be the first person somebody sees coming into our building. So I said, well, that is absolutely shocking that you would say that. So I reported that and to the leadership at the church, and they said, oh, well, just forgive the person and move on. So it was the same response, just forgive the person and move on. So I moved on, and I moved on, but you know, those types of experiences sort of do stick with you. Like, they're just in the back of my mind that, you know, there's certain places I do have to be safe when I go into, because, like, they're not necessarily going to be friendly. So, let's see. To wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so. So after I finished at Oakland University, this was my commute for about 4 or 5 years. This was my daily commute. So I lived in Rochester. I taught a class in the morning at Oakland University. I would drive down and teach a class at Henry Ford College, and drive over and teach a class at Oakland Community College, and then one at International Academy of Design, and then I would go home. So I had nearly over a 2-hour commute every day, because I was an adjunct instructor, and excuse me, and as an adjunct instructor, I took whatever classes they offered to me. So I didn't think anything of it, because I just didn't want to say no one semester and have them not give me a class the next semester. So I fought the traffic, and that says 2 hours, that's without traffic. Yeah, so someday, there were a couple of days where the weather was so bad in Rochester, and you know how the weather patterns are. I mean, there's a lot of weather changes that can happen in 70 miles. So there were some days when I had to call here and say, the weather's too bad near me, I can't make it. And there was nothing I could do. But we always talk about, like, going green and how we need more public transportation and how we shouldn't drive cars as much, and sustainability and, you know, all of that. And I'm thinking, without my car, there's no way I could have gotten to work. I could have taken public transit and done that. And so I'm thankful that I have this gas guzzling car, because it gave me work for 5 years. So you know, I mean, we talk a lot about these issues, but that was where I ended up after grad school. But then I finally did get a full-time job in 2011, and so I moved from Rochester over to, I actually moved right about here first for a year before I moved down here. But when I moved there, I was robbed again. So I just said, you know, I moved here because I was told, oh, it's a better neighborhood. And well, better neighborhood doesn't mean that it's going to be opening to the Asian culture. All right, it was just better in the eyes of the woman with blonde hair and blue eyes that told me that. I think personally she just felt safer herself in that neighborhood, and I didn't feel safer because I got robbed. You know, so I feel quite safe in this neighborhood. And even though I know that on each side of me there are two other apartment complexes. Like, my complex is condos, and on each side there's like trouble in each of the other two sides, but because it's all fenced in, they're contained, I feel safe where I'm at. So I live 5 minutes from my college now, and I'm happy with that. So even though it's not like inner city Detroit, it's not a neighborhood that I'm not comfortable living in, and I found a lot of personal success in living there the last 5 years and being able to overcome some of my personal problems and issues from the past. But with that being said, I just want to give a few comments and thank yous, sort of, to how I end up getting here today. And, I end up at Macomb, and my college is actually very willing to let me come to conferences and do professional development. And the number one thing I asked them when I applied was, are you able to guarantee that I can do as much professional development as I want for my entire career at the college? And they said yes. So pretty much if I want to go to a conference or something, they will do it, because that was part of what they agreed to when they hired me, and I made sure it was in what my agreement with them, because that was something important to me. Like trying to get personal professional development, that was important to me because of all the troubles I've had in the past in growing up. And then we have the Macomb Multicultural and International Initiatives Committee and the MMII Committee, and I do a lot of math and cultural events and math and diversity events for my students. And if you come back to the presentation this afternoon, the one with Randy over here, I will be showing you examples of my student created posters from this week. I have pictures of them actually. I couldn't actually bring them because they're still hanging up at the library. Like the timing for this conference sort of didn't work out for me to bring them. I have a couple of the ones that were offensive that I couldn't put up. I could show you, but that wouldn't help. Like students always, even though I try hard to inform them, will unintentionally put something offensive down, and that's a good discussion for all of us, because we had a Chinese display a few years ago, and one of the students put the Chinese flag cut out in the shape of a heart on her poster, and we had a Chinese woman come in who said that is offensive to my country's flag. So we removed the poster, and so there's little things like that the students tell me, well, we wouldn't be offended if somebody did that to the American flag, but that's not the issue. The issue is that you have different values, and you have a different culture, and you come from have a different background than somebody else from a different country, and you have to appreciate that. And so it's always a good discussion for my students. And so they also, at my college, have allowed me to participate in the summer institutes, which are very, very well run, and I've went to 2 of them now and have been very impressed. And then they also have supported my participation in AMATIC, or the American Mathematical Associations of 2-year colleges, and I was saying this before the presentation, but I went to the board meeting in Memphis now, and after like a couple of years in the organization, I quickly somehow became regional vice president of the Midwest, and I don't know how that happened, but I've gotten to do things like I'm working on the equal opportunity in mathematics position statement right now. I'm working on a lot of different diversity initiatives with the organization, and I think that's going to give me a chance to have an impact on a national level that I wouldn't have had before, maybe even an international level. So I'm very happy that all of my background and all my experiences have led me to where I am today. So that is it, actually. So thank you.